Hello, all you spiral lovers out there, and welcome to a very special, very limited review and discussion podcast of Uzumaki.
Uzumaki.
My name is Fletcher. About to say hello is John.
Hello, my name is John.
So, John, how long have we been brothers?
I believe we have been brothers for as long as I've been alive, which is 33 years.
Nice. So, as an explanation of what we're doing here today, I was flipping through streaming services a while ago looking for something to watch, and a thing popped up on my recommended list on HBO Max called Uzumaki, which is apparently a limited anime series. And at that point, there was only one first episode, so I was like, okay, no clue what this is, but it's only 24 minutes, so what have I got to lose? And watching it, it quickly became apparent, this is something. I was like, no clue what this is, but this is something. And by the end of that first episode, I was like, okay, this is something that John probably needs to watch. And I think I was right, because John came back with thoughts, which are related to your particular unique interests.
Yeah, that's right. So for those listening and don't know me, I'm a creative type. I write music and the lyrics thereof. I try to do a little bit of creative writing as well. And a few years ago, for creative inspiration, I began to explore occultism, mysticism, religion, and philosophy. Over time, this passing fancy evolved into a full-blown intellectual pursuit. So these days, I focus primarily on the topics of Hermetic philosophy and alchemy. And given that the Swiss psychoanalyst Carl Jung wrote extensively on these subjects, I've lately begun to supplement my reading with a bit of Jungian psychology. And this show, Uzumaki, definitely leaves an impression on me, and that I believe it is deliberately esoteric in these respects.
Mm-hmm. That gives you a pretty good taste of what a conversation with John is like. But I don't know how deliberately esoteric it is, but it's definitely fun to analyze things through different lenses. So
for sure,
we will discuss the episode, and you will provide your thoughts in that field.
Yeah.
So, but supposedly this is going to be a 4-episode series, so we'll probably just do this review of the first 2 episodes and 2 more after this. It's on HBO Max, and the first episode is free on the Adult Swim website. I tried looking at the second episode on there, and you could not get to it without signing in with your cable provider. So I don't know quite what the deal is, but I strongly, strongly recommend watching it before listening to this discussion. I don't know what would be weirder, listening to this discussion without watching it or just watching it.
Probably best to watch it first.
Yeah, but I think it's worth watching. It's got gorgeous visuals. Apparently it's based on a manga by Junji Ito. And also, apparently, there's a movie of this same manga. We don't know anything about any of those. We're just watching this anime, or at least I don't. We're just watching this anime series.
Yeah, I've no previous, encounter with this franchise. It's
right.
It's all fresh to me.
Yeah, we don't know anything else. So we're going in totally fresh. And there will be full spoilers up through the episode being discussed. Usual undeclared Bajor rules. Although we are not capable of spoiling past what we've seen, so really no worry there. But usual caveat that we might accidentally spoil all kinds, we might spoil Game of Thrones, we might spoil whatever. So that's always put that caveat in our episodes. So we'll dive into a summary of the first episode. So we open with a brief little bit of narration from our main character, Kyrie, who explains to voiceover that this is the story of her hometown, Kurozu. And we see her walking past, like, spiral weeds and, like, clouds filled with spirals. Oh, and by the way, Uzumaki means spiral, I think. So that's very relevant to this show. Then we get a creepy little intro. Then we jump back to Kyrie at the train station waiting to greet her boyfriend, Shuichi, who I guess goes to school in a different town and commutes back and forth on a train. So he goes to school in a town called Midoriyama, which I have taken enough Japanese to know that means Green Mountain. So it might at some point be worth looking into what all the place and people names in this show mean. I have not done that yet, but
I bet it'll be very illuminating.
Could be. But yeah, Kyrie and Shuichi walk home together from the train station, and Shuichi brings up the idea of leaving town together and running away to somewhere else, for weird stuff has been happening in town. There's whirlpools in the streams, a notable increase in whirlwinds, and perhaps most disturbingly, Shuichi's dad has gotten a little obsessed with spirals.
A little be putting it lightly. I'd say obsessed with a capital O.
Oh, yeah. A capital O that's shaped like a spiral.
That's right.
So, yeah, Shuichi explains that his dad has stopped going to work and just sits by himself staring at a bunch of spiral-shaped objects he's collected. And when he looks at the spirals, his eyes start spinning around really fast. The left eye and right eye spinning independently of each other. So, you know, just that normal thing that happens.
Yeah, as they do.
Right. And he gets mad when there's no spiral fish cakes in his miso soup. He can't take a bath without turning the bath into a giant whirlpool. Kyrie tries to laugh at all this, and Shuichi is just like, yeah, I know, it sounds crazy, but it's when you just gotta see it. And then a siren starts wailing for some reason. I don't know if this is like a thing that happens in all Japanese towns. They don't seem surprised by it. They say it just means 5 p.m.
Yeah, I'm not sure what they got going on over in Japan. If they have a siren at 5 p.m., then I wonder what they got going on when a disaster strikes.
Right. But Shuichi says that the sound feels like it's going around and around in his ears. Like a spiral. He says he hates everything about this town. The gloomy sea, the sinister black lighthouse, insidious mountains and looming cityscape. It all winds him up like a spiral. And then a whirlwind blows past them.
All right. So yeah, we have an opening scene. Seems to kick off the plot with the spiral, the whole spiral nonsense with his dad.
Right.
And, it also establishes our setting.
Mm-hmm.
So, at this point, when I was first watching it, I'd been reading a lot of Carl Jung, and Carl Jung has a few things to say about spirals. In the Jungian view, the spiral is a mandala, which is pretty much any symbol that represents the self. And so when you have a spiral, the self is located at the center, but what is unique about the spiral is that it specifically represents the process of self-discovery by what Jung calls circumambulation.
That means walking around, right?
Right, yeah. Like they do in Mecca. They walk around, what's that stone that they have?
The Kaaba?
Yeah, the Kaaba. So they all walk around it, and that's a circumambulation. And, the dervishes, of, I guess, Islamic mysticism, the Sufis, they try to achieve mystical experience by whirling around in circles, and that's also a kind of circumambulation.
So do you think that's tied into the eyeballs spinning around independently of each other?
I do have an idea of what that might mean, but
okay.
I think I can talk about it later when we get to Moon Girl.
Okay, sure.
And it's only like I think that's like an interpretation I'm less sure of, or I think that's more reasonably open to a wider interpretation, depending on how you look at it. But I think what is going on here is that this spiral process, it seems to be that we're in for a tale of self-discovery, and that's my personal theory on what the trajectory of the show is.
Okay. At what point did you realize just how saturated with spirals this show was going to be?
Yeah, 5 seconds in.
Yeah, after they said the word spiral 80,000 times in the opening scene.
Right. And, they were just everywhere.
Right. Like I said, I had no clue what this was about when I started watching it. And I was like, oh, we're doing spirals, I guess.
That's right.
So, anyway, Shuichi wanders off, and Kyrie goes home and finds that Shuichi's dad is there hanging out with her dad, who's working at a pottery wheel. Shuichi's dad is entranced by the pottery wheel for reasons that I think should be obvious. Kyrie's dad says that sometimes the wheel makes him feel dizzy, and Shuichi's dad is quite intrigued by this. He's drooling. He asks Kyrie's dad to make him a bowl with a spiral pattern, specifically to make him dizzy by looking at it. And then we get a crazy close-up on Shuichi's dad's crazy eyes as he starts going oh man, I love spirals, you have no idea. I think there's some mysterious power contained in them. And he says that Kyrie's dad must be the ultimate artist for being able to create spirals. And then Kyrie is just watching the whole thing from the doorway and is like, yeah, something weird might be going on with that guy. And then later at school, we meet Kyrie's friend, Azami, who I guess is who you call Moon Girl, who is jealous of Kyrie for having a boyfriend who goes to a different school because the boys at this school suck. Kyrie says, you're so pretty, you must have the pick of any boy you want. And then at that point, a gust of wind blows Azami's bangs to the side and reveals a strange crescent-shaped scar on her forehead. And she tells the story of when she was little, and she was trying to impress a boy by playing as a tightrope walker, but then she fell down and hit her head. And ever since that day, every boy she has liked her back. And from what I can tell, also plenty of boys that she doesn't like. But she speculates that this crescent-shaped scar has some kind of boy-attracting power. And then we cut briefly to a boy staring at her from afar. So Kyrie and Azami walk to the train station together to meet Shuichi coming home from school. They pass by a bunch of boys who are all sweating and drooling over how hot Azami is. Shuichi steps off the train and Kyrie introduces him to Azami, explaining that Azami does the reverse commute to him, so she lives in Midoriyama and goes to school in Kurozu, the two paths moving in opposite direction. So you know what happens when two things pass each other going in opposite directions. But Shuichi stares at Azami's forehead and freaks out. He grabs Kyrie and drags her away, saying that he can sense a spiral in Azami. In fact, she is a spiral.
Oh my.
Later, Kyrie's dad asks her to go deliver Shuichi's dad that spiral pot he asked for, and she's like, I'd rather not, but she goes to deliver it. And Shuichi's dad says he doesn't need it anymore. He has learned how to make spirals of himself. And as proof, he sticks out his tongue, which grows to 3 feet long and wraps it into a big spiral.
Yeah, so, here I'm seeing, a bit of a confirmation, if a spiral is a symbol of the self, and the father turns himself, or begins to turn himself into spirals, then we have a bit of an integration of the character and the symbol.
But should you want yourself to be a spiral? This is an interesting question, I think. Because isn't the whole thing about the spiral is the true you is trapped in the middle?
Yes. I guess the best way to put it is the totality of the self, which is not exactly the same as the ego self, but is the fully realized, discovered self, resides in the middle of the spiral.
Okay. So should you want to become a spiral, or should you want to unspiral? Or is the spiral good?
Well, I think it's interesting. In the opening credit, we see the spiral kind of unwind into the title, but the title is in the
Oh.
shape of a cross, which is another mandala representing the self.
Oh, interesting. But yeah, so when Kyrie sees this crazy tongue trick, she freaks out and drops the pot, which makes the Kurlan Naskos shattering sound effect.
Yes.
If you know what I'm referencing there.
Yeah.
And yeah, she bolts. Then another guy shows up with a delivery of a big barrel, and Shuichi's dad is like, "Oh hell yeah, bring that over here." And then we get a scene where Shuichi is walking down the street and he gets ambushed by Izami, who demands to know why her magical boy-seducing powers don't work on him. He freaks out, sensing the spiral energy emanating from her forehead. He demands to know what's on her forehead, and she pulls her hair aside and is like, "Behold my amazing boy-seducing crescent-shaped scar." But the scar is no longer shaped like a crescent. It is a spiral.
Dun dun dun.
I'm just running. I'm quickly running out of ways to sell the twist that it turns out to be a spiral. But
I think we should just accept that any noun that we're talking about is just a spiral.
right, anytime we talk about any person, place, or thing, assume it's a spiral unless we say otherwise. But Shuichi gets more freaked out and says she needs to get out of town, away from the spiral contamination. But she says she can't because she's so in love with him. But he just freaks out and runs off. And then we get a hard cut to Shuichi's dad's funeral. So
Yeah.
yes, Shuichi's dad is apparently dead now.
Yeah, a bit of a time skip.
Right. And everyone stands around the crematorium as he gets cremated, which, again, I don't know if this is a Japanese custom or just special to this town or what's going on. But smoke starts to rise from the smokestack as Shuichi tells Kyrie how his dad died. The official story that he fell down some stairs was a lie. What really happened is that Shuichi and his mom went to a mental hospital to see about getting his dad checked in, because of the craziness. And when they got home, they couldn't find him until they found that strange barrel in his study. And they opened it up and discovered that Shuichi's dad had climbed inside and turned his whole body into a spiral,
Oh my goodness.
breaking all his bones and killing him. And then people start pointing up at the sky. The cremation smoke has formed a giant spiral in the sky. The smoke spiral starts to unravel and flies towards Dragonfly Pond. The significance of that is not clear to me, but then Shuichi's mom looks up at the sky and freaks out, for the smoke has formed the image of Shuichi's dad as a spiral, with a spiral tongue sticking out. So, pretty weird funeral.
Yep. So I think I can jump in here and give a little bit of interpretation.
Please do.
Let's see. All right. So, yeah, the father gets cremated and rises into the sky in the form of smoke. And here, yeah, we have a very interesting scene that I think corresponds to an important first stage in the alchemical process of transformation. Shuichi's dad is transformed into, let's say, an etheric spirit body by means of fire. And he rises into the sky as a cloud of smoke. And the smoke forms a spiral. And following this, the smoke is pulled down into the local pond, which is named Dragonfly Pond. Just a second ago, you were wondering what the significance of the Dragonfly Pond is.
Yes.
A pond, being a body of water, represents the unconscious. Water represents the unconscious because, as with the mind, there are things hidden below the surface that are unknown to us unless we were to plunge into the deep and discover these things. So what I think has happened here is a sort of ego dissolution by means of fire, which in alchemy is called calcination. And so the dissolved ego is then entered into the water, and all these things being so, I don't expect at all that this will be the last we see of Dragonfly Pond.
Okay. So you think it's going to come back?
Oh, yeah.
All right.
I mean, since it has a name, and the name being Dragonfly Pond, you know, I don't know what dragonflies may symbolize, but dragons are definitely an important symbol in esotericism.
Sure. Yeah, the fact that they make such a point of saying that the smoke went to Dragonfly Pond makes it seem like it's not something they're just going to dismiss.
Yeah.
Or also, you got to keep in mind we could be dealing with Eastern symbolism.
It's true. And you know, I'm not super familiar with the Eastern side of esotericism, but I do think that water has the same correspondence with like unconscious contents.
Okay. So let me see, where in this like big notes full with the word spiral are we? So later, Azami meets up with Kyrie walking down the road, and suddenly a whirlwind blows past them, blowing Azami's hair to the side, revealing a big spiral hole in her forehead where the scar used to be. Kyrie freaks out and Azami just runs off. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Shuichi's mom has totally lost it and freaks out over the spiral in the hair bun of one of the nurses. Then Azami is walking down the street and gets ambushed by a boy who is obsessed with her. He says he's drawn to her for some reason and he can't shake it. And then, when you think we've settled into the weirdness, we meet Katayama. Kyrie is in class on a rainy day when a hand slowly opens the classroom door, and slowly walks in Katayama, who slowly apologizes for being late. One of the classmates teases Katayama for being the ultimate slowpoke, which is pretty good description. We also learn that Katayama only comes to school when it's raining, and he doesn't have an umbrella, so he's always wet.
Yes, and I think that's an important detail. Relating to what I just said about the unconscious and water.
Yeah. If you have not watched this show, I cannot sell how weird this whole thing is. But in PE class, Katayama proves to be not a very ideal teammate in volleyball. So some bullies corner him in the locker room and strip off all his clothes and drag him naked into the hallway. But all their laughter turns into horror when they notice that on Katayama's back is a big spiral.
Oh my goodness.
So we'll have more to say, I think, about Katayama in the next episode. But
right.
So back at the hospital, Kyrie and Shuichi pay Shuichi's mother a visit. She's now bald with bandages on her hands. Shuichi explains that the spirals in her hair freaked her out, and then the spirals on her fingerprints and toe prints freaked her out, so she cut them off. Every spiral reminds her of finding her husband in that barrel, and in her visions, he calls out to her to come join him in the spiral.
Yes. Yeah, I think something pretty interesting has happened here. She begins her own descent into madness and is following in her husband's footsteps. And becoming fearful of spirals, she begins to go so far as to cut off her hair and her fingernails. Or, not nails, her fingerprints.
Fingerprints.
Yeah. These being they're typical identifying features. And I think what we're seeing with her is some sort of identity severance.
Yes, I did find that interesting, that you say that the spiral is the symbol of the self. And she cuts off her fingerprints, which are have become kind of a symbol of individual identity. So, interesting. But yeah, the only way they've gotten her to calm down is to completely remove all spirals from her presence. At night, Kyrie is walking down the street and sees Azami walking, wearing a snazzy new hat. Nothing horrific could be under that hat. Azami seems a little out of it and says she's having trouble focusing her eyes. And the reason soon becomes clear when she takes off her hat, for the hole in her head has grown, and we're just in time to see it swallow up one of her eyeballs.
And she says she feels like she's losing focus.
Exactly. Yes. Hard to focus when your eyeball is dangling in a big swirly hole. Elsewhere, Shuichi and Okada, who is the creepy kid who's obsessed with Azami, are standing out in the dark. Apparently, Okada has told Shuichi that Kyrie wanted to meet him there. But it's all a ruse concocted by Azami to get Shuichi alone. Okada asks if Azami will go out with him now that she's lured Shuichi for him, and she says, "No, now I have no use for him." This angers Okada, who rips off her hat, revealing that almost her whole face is now a spiral. Then Okada reaches towards the spiral and gets sucked into it. And then Kyrie and Shuichi watch in horror as the spiral grows and swallows up Azami, and she vanishes into nothing. And then Kyrie resumes her voiceover from the beginning of the episode and assures us that everything that happened was just the beginning, as the camera lingers on a spiral shell in the rain. The end of episode 1.
And what a doozy that first episode was. Definitely trippy. I felt like I was in a dream while watching it. Just totally, it's one of those, with all those spirals around, I couldn't help but feel mesmerized by the whole affair.
Oh, yes. So, you want to touch on all those story threads real fast from that episode?
Yeah, sure. So starting from the beginning, we establish all these spirals that have appeared, but I think going along with the subject of the self, I couldn't help but notice that in that first scene we have all sorts of symbols that have come to represent the self.
Oh, really?
Yes. So let me find my notes here. So Shuichi, he looks over the city and looks at all the stuff that he's having a gloomy disposition about. Let me see if I can find the quote. Oh yeah, he's looking at the gloomy sea, the sinister lighthouse, the insidious mountains, and looming cityscape.
Mm-hmm.
And lo and behold, I'm going to tell you that all of these are symbols of the self. And furthermore, I think we also have the 4 classical elements present here. So to explain, the sea obviously is water, and how that relates to the self is it represents the depths of unconscious parts of the self. The lighthouse is a symbol that corresponds to the spinal column, at the top of which sits the light of consciousness, and in this, it is the fire symbol. Fire corresponding to life force, the active principle, or spirit. But the lighthouse particularly is also a lunar symbol because it shines in the night and doesn't shine in the day. The mountain, it's seemingly an earth symbol, but it's actually an air symbol. Air corresponding to the intellect or conscious mind. One ascends up to the top of the mountain, which is in the sky. So the top of the mountain represents the height of consciousness. And the ascent is the ascent to the mountain is the journey we take to get there. And I wouldn't be shocked if there was some sort of a mountain ascent at some point further down the line in the series.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, we get a lighthouse ascent in the next episode.
That's right. And in esoteric symbolism, the mountain of initiation is ascended by means of a spiral pathway. And the last symbol that we have here, the city, is typically an earthy symbol. Earth corresponding to like the physical manifestation. That is like the physical body, which, like a city, is built up of many component parts.
Yeah.
So I'm fairly convinced that this show you know, obviously we're only 2 episodes in, so
Right.
it might take a sudden turn and, you know, prove me all wrong, but I'm fairly convinced that we're you know, talking about the self here.
Well, I mean, any art is a dialogue between the creator and the consumer, right?
That's true.
So
yeah.
It's always 100% fair to bring your interpretation to things.
Yeah.
Uh,
So yeah, Shuichi's father. Do we know his name? I don't know his name.
I don't know if we know his given name. I think his name is Mr. Sato or Mr. Saito or something like that.
Okay. For the sake of easiness, we'll just call him Dad.
Sure, Dad.
All right. So he has a obsession with spirals. So he goes to, I believe this is Kyrie's father, who's the potter.
I believe so. Yeah.
All right. So the potter's wheel. That's a. The funny thing is we were talking about spirals over and over again, but now I'm just going to be saying the word self over and over again.
Right.
So the potter is a symbol of a creator. Most importantly, the creator aspect of God, and the potter's wheel is his tool for creation, where he shapes vessels with his hands. I have a note from Carl Jung who says of the potter's wheel. The potter's wheel rotates on the ground and produces earthenware or earthly vessels, which may have figuratively be called human bodies. Being round, the wheel refers to the self and the creative activity in which it manifests, so like a circumambulation. The potter's wheel also symbolizes the recurrent theme of circulation. So, Suichi's, just Dad, commissions the potter to make a spiral for him, and we already gone over this. I think anything I can say about the matter would be kind of self-evident.
Right.
All right. So I think we've put the mysteries of Suichi's dad to rest.
Okay.
He is at the bottom of the pond, discovering whatever mysteries hide down there.
Okay.
All right. So Azami, the girl with the moon scar.
Right. So
the moon is a particularly important symbol in esotericism, especially in alchemy. It's one of those symbols that we should take. It's one of those symbols that would take a long time to adequately unpack. But in a few sentences, the moon is a luminous body that cycles between light and dark phases, light being consciousness and dark being unconsciousness. And she is known to have an influence over the waters by means of gravitation.
True.
So I think the best way to talk about the moon is how she's depicted in the tarot. So the moon is associated first and foremost with the High Priestess card. And so I'm aware that the Tarot Major Arcana also has a moon card, but the moon card is itself meant to correspond to the constellation Pisces. Don't ask me why. But the High Priestess, she sits between two pillars, one black and the other white. She holds the scroll of the Torah half hidden under her robe, and she sits guarding the veil of the mysteries. And so what the High Priestess is trying to tell you is that reality is half hidden, and the known acts as a veil which hides the unknown. And in psychological terms, she's trying to tell you that the conscious ego is not the totality of the self, and that the unconscious parts of the self can be discovered if you were to take a peek behind the veil by means of introspection. So what the moon essentially represents is the veil that separates the conscious ego from the unconscious parts of the self. And furthermore, as the High Priestess, she invites the ego through the veil. She wants the hidden to be made known. So in this, the moon represents the act of introspection. Now our moon girl, Azami, says that she acquired her moon scar when she fell off a tightrope. And I think this does align with the mystery of the creation of the soul and how it fell into physical manifestation, where it became blinded to the mysteries. And let's see.
Well, what do you think is the symbolism of the crescent moon growing into a spiral?
I think, so I'm going to go back to the potter's wheel. The moon goes about in a circular course as if it was itself on a potter's wheel. And,
Mhm.
there's like a circumambulation. And so, I'm associating circumambulation with the process of self-discovery. So, while necessarily think that the moon is rigidly associated with the spiral, I think you can make a correlation.
Because you were talking about like this veil between the conscious and the unconscious self or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I was thinking it was interesting that turns into the spiral, which even though it's round, feels like a little bit more of an unobstructed path to the center of the self or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, well, the spiral, it's like the with the circumambulation, you get closer and closer to the self. So let's say you start at a arbitrary point. Let's say you're completely intellectual and like kind of closed off to maybe the emotional aspect of yourself, and so you discover the emotional aspect of yourself, but then you start to explore that aspect of yourself and kind of leave the intellectual behind.
Yeah.
And then you go through some other phases, and then you eventually go back to like, all right, you know what, I'm an intellectual person, and so you're back at that starting point, but with a little bit of the other parts integrated.
So you're a little bit deeper.
Yeah. And so this continues, and you start to integrate all the various aspects of yourself until you are integrated and whole and fully realized.
Okay.
All right. So I think the really exciting part of this episode is its culmination in the trippy sequence of events centered around Azami.
Right.
So at this final stage of the episode, Moon Girl is shown to have a deep whirl-pulling spiral just over her right eye. And she says, quote, "I can't seem to focus," and her right eye descends into the spiral. No, I think it is important here to note the anatomy of the body as it relates to esoteric symbolism. So the body is bifurcated into right and left, but there's a crisscross between the body and the mind. So the left side of the brain corresponds to the intellect, the ego, the logical side of reasoning, and the right side of the brain corresponds to abstract thinking, creativity, imagination, and the unconscious. But there's a crisscross between mind and body, so that the left side of the brain controls the right side of the body, and the right side of the brain controls the left side of the body. So when the right eye sinks into the right side of the head, it's as if the intellect ego I is sinking into the abstract unconscious mind.
Oh, man.
And I can't help but associate this event with the story of the Norse god Odin and his sacrifice at the world tree Yggdrasil. He does this to attain to attain wisdom, he plucks out his right eye and casts it into the well of Mimir. The well also being a symbol of the unconscious, as it contains both water and it is also a dark hole like a cave. The cave usually being a portal to the underworld. So Odin plucks out his right eye and casts it into the well. And this is kind of like it's like a form of meditation. You're supposed to cast your intellect through the veil into the underworld, which is, the unconscious.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's how you obtain wisdom, is by looking within.
Sure.
So following this, Shuichi is brought to Moon Girl by, what was his name? The guy who has a crush on her?
It was like Okada or something like that.
Okay, Okada. We'll just go with Okada.
Sure.
I think Okada plays the role of a trickster or like a psychopomp. He brings the protagonist to, the gateway into the underworld, Or, he, in the sense of like a trickster, he could be like, Judas, who betrays the protagonist into the hands of the enemy,
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
And, so here we see that the spiral on her head has grown and is starting to absorb anything that gets close to it. Okada gets sucked in, and then Moon Girl herself gets sucked in. And in a sense, she devours herself. And I can't help but associate this event with the symbol of the Ouroboros, which is the serpent that eats its own tail.
Ah, yes.
And this is a symbol of the uniting of opposites, which is in religion, that's the goal, and that's kind of like how self-discovery is achieved, by uniting the opposites. So like the Star of David is like the symbol, the upright triangle of fire and the inverted triangle of water, and they're married together,
Huh.
And the same thing with the cross. Like the cross has like two different perpendicular planes, and they're intersecting and united into a unified symbol.
Huh.
There's an emblem in alchemy in a book known as the Elementa Chemiae, or I can't pronounce that. Chemiae. Yeah,
Sure.
Elementa
Something
Chemiae.
in Latin.
Yeah, right. This emblem shows a serpent being entered into the alchemical retort, which is full of water. This serpent proceeds to drink all of the water that's inside, and then he proceeds to devour himself. And I have a relevant quote here that is from the Tractatus Aristotelius, which says, "The serpent is more cunning than all the beasts of the earth. Under the beauty of her skin she shows a harmless face, and she forms herself in the manner of a hypostatic material, through illusion when immersed in water. There she gathers together the virtues of the earth, which is her body. And because she is very thirsty, she drinks immoderately and becomes drunken, and she causes the nature wherewith she is united to vanish." And so all this I think, is a nice, correlation or kind of parallel to the horrors we saw at the end of the first episode of Uzumaki. Azamuki.
Yeah. Uzumaki. Right.
So that's what came to mind for me when I first watched that sequence.
Interesting. My mythology is a little rusty. Doesn't something happen when the Ouroboros finishes eating himself? Or am I way off there? Or does he never finish eating himself?
I think that's just the end. Because, the Ouroboros is one of those symbols that it could be unpacked in so many ways.
Sure.
And so, one way is that, like, it represents the idea that, like, the universe comes out of this cosmic void, and in the end it will return to the same void,
Huh. Yeah.
And then, presumably the cycle repeats. It's all, it's kind of like the birth and death cycle of a person.
Sure. All right.
But in alchemy, the devouring of the unconscious, the drinking of the water and the devouring of the self, that's like you discover all the unconscious contents, and so you're made whole as a consequence. But of course, the vanishing, I can't help but see kind of a parallel correspondence between Moon Girl's story and Shuichi's dad's story, in that they both disappear into, the spiral on the forehead isn't necessarily about a body of water, but I do associate it with the well. So sure. I think they both vanish into a body of water, or into an underworld of some sort.
Into the deep?
Yes.
We're all about the deep here, so.
Oh, yeah.
So do you have any more thoughts on that episode before we move on to episode 2?
Nothing super important.
So, episode 2. It's another rainy day at school. And that means, who shows up when it's raining? Katayama. Katayama rolls into class late as usual, but today there's something different about him. His back, where, if you'll recall, there was that big spiral, is all swollen. He looks kind of like a snail. And then we meet Kazunori and Yoriko, a couple of young sweethearts who are napping in a shed or something. And they're awakened by a strange sound. There, writhing around on the floor, are 2 snakes disgustingly wrapped around each other. Yoriko thinks they're fighting, but Kazunori knows what's up. They're banging. So I can only imagine all the wonderful symbolism you have for this, but...
Yep, and, I can go ahead and begin.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, so, a snail is a symbol, it's an animal symbol it kind of represents the fact that this process is long and slow, and it can only be reached by a very slow moving forward with steady progress.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I think it's funny that he shows up only when it's wet, because you achieve this process by going into the water.
Uh-huh.
And so the snakes, we have a boy and a girl. They're in I guess what's described later in the episode as a poorhouse.
Yeah, I don't know if they're in the poorhouse or if they're in some kind of shed or something, but yeah.
Well, it's definitely a rundown situation that they're in.
Because it seems like they're hiding out from their parents.
Yeah. So, these serpents that show up, I think are the centerpiece in episode 2, because all throughout we have examples of things intertwining. We have braided hair. We have a teacher talking about double helixes, and we have a culminating event of animal transformation, 2 serpents that intertwine. And now what's the significance of this? Given that I'm viewing this show kind of primarily through the lens of alchemy, I recognize this symbol to be the most important alchemical symbol of all, which is Mercury, otherwise known as Hermes, the bearer of the caduceus, which is the intertwining snakes.
Yes, yes.
And so these intertwining snakes, there's a little detail here that they, while they're mating, they drop into a hole, a black hole, in a sense, going to the underworld.
Ah, yes. Yeah, they kind of like disappear into a hole in the floor out of sight.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Did you have more on that, or you saving it?
No? Yeah, we can proceed through the episode.
Okay, so Kyrie walks home with a friend through a cemetery, and Azami's not around anymore, so she's just hanging out with a random friend. But they talk about how Azami is still missing and nobody knows where she is, which makes me wonder, what about the guy she sucked up? Did they find him? Or
Nobody cares about him.
Yeah, just nobody cares. But the friend also mentions that since the creepy cremation spiral smoke incident, they have started just burying people instead of cremating them. Because apparently even in other cities, when someone from Kurozu is cremated, they get that same spiral problem. But somehow they still explain it away as a combination of crematory malfunction and weather phenomenon.
I see. Yeah, I'm sure burying the dead won't come back to bite them later.
Right. Then a kid jumps out from behind a tombstone and immediately just starts declaring his love for Kyrie. And I guess this is this kid's usual shtick, because everybody just calls him Jack in the Box. He wants to go out with Kyrie, seemingly not because he likes her, but because mainly he sees her as some kind of status symbol. But she's not interested. And also, I feel like he seems a little young for her. But then Kyrie happens across some commotion. Kazunori and Yoriko have apparently run into their parents, and Yoriko's dad punches Kazunori and drags Yoriko off. And so Kazunori sits with Kyrie and explains what's going on. So apparently they are neighbors in this poor house, this poor row house. And for some reason, their parents just super hate each other, which Kazunori thinks is an attempt to, distract themselves from their poverty or something. But he describes the parents as twisted, and whenever 2 twisted people lock horns, they can't break free, and things spiral out of control.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that he says horns when, I would have been readily expecting that he would have talked about snakes, like they twist like snakes, but he says horns. So I'm wondering if at some point in the future we will see these parents undergo some sort of animal transformation where they become some sort of horned creature. And I'm going to hazard a guess that they're going to become rams, which have a spiral horns, right?
Yes.
Or, I don't know how many other animals have spiral horns. It might be that they become goats. But I'd be interested to see where that goes.
Is a ram a kind of goat? I don't know.
Ram is a boy sheep.
Oh, okay. Yes. What are those things with like the like twisty horns? The like an ibex or whatever?
Yeah, I think you're talking about an ibex, which is a kind of goat. I don't know. I just googled it. They do have horns that curve around. It could be so. Yeah, I mean, could be far enough to be considered a spiral. They seem more like kind of crescents.
Oh yeah, okay. Yeah, I think I see what you're talking about. But I think it's also worth mentioning that. Are you watching the sub or dubbed version?
Dubbed.
Right, the English dub.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I noticed that no matter, or at least on Max, no matter which one you watch, the subtitles just give you the exact text of the English dub. So there could be some translation nuances that we're missing out on. Like,
of course.
So if he says they lock horns, that might be a different Japanese idiom that has been adjusted into a more familiar English one.
True.
Like there could be a Japanese saying it's like, they twist up like snakes or something, and then they've just translated it to they like lock horns. So we don't know. We're missing out on that kind of like layer of what's going on. But
yeah, I'm sure that's one of those things we might be able to discover, hidden meaning behind the names of things and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, definitely have to remember to look that up before next time. So Kazunori says that he and Yoriko are planning on running away tomorrow on the train, which obviously comes back. But later, Kirie and Shuichi are visiting Shuichi's mom in the hospital, and Shuichi confirms to Kirie that he senses strong spiral curse energy coming from that poorhouse. And he specifically says it's the kind that twists people. So, we'll probably talk about this a little bit more later, but there's kind of last episode, was about spirals. This episode seems to be a little bit more about like helixes, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Which, and twisting and stuff like that. So, I don't know, kind of interesting. But, and then I don't quite understand what this was about. Shuichi pulls out some Polaroids. One shows some kids cheering, and then the second one shows like a kid like laying dead or hurt on the ground. I don't know. Is this a reference to something that happened last episode that I forgot about? I don't think so.
Yeah, I didn't flash on anything.
But Shuichi's takeaway from that is that when someone is touched by the spiral, which has the clear power to draw things to its center, so he's just kind of like explaining the spiral symbolism now. When someone's touched by a spiral, then they're driven to attract the attention of anyone and everyone. So, kind of foreshadowing some stuff that's going to happen in a little bit. But and by the way, Kirie, has your hair gotten longer? Which, to be fair, that's what hair does. But yes, that night, Kirie is brushing her hair and realizes it is indeed getting longer. The next morning, Kirie is walking to school, and everyone starts staring at her because her hair has suddenly formed into big curls. A girl named Kyoko offers to help braid her hair to get rid of them. But later, Kirie is in class listening to the teacher lecture on the double helix structure of DNA, and then her braid comes undone and the curls reform. And Kyoko just stares at her with an angry look on her face.
She's jelly.
I think Kyoko is her priorities are not exactly straightened out, but but nobody has really time to notice any of this because something starts crawling up the outside of the window. It's Katayama, now in his final giant snail form. His eyes pop out of their sockets and turn into stalks.
Attaboy.
He's living his snail life, But Kirie goes to the stylist and asks her to cut off the curls, but then the hair comes to life and starts attacking the stylist. At home, the hair starts strangling Kirie while her family watches in horror. Her little brother Mitsuo theorizes that the hare is angry because she tried to cut it. The mom thinks this is dumb, but the dad's like, I don't know, that kind of makes sense. But then they all start staring at the curls, which at this point are huge and sticking way up, and all their eyes turn into spirals. So they're all like hypnotized.
Yeah, so what this brings to mind for me, I can't help but think about Medusa.
Oh, yes.
Even
I could make that connection.
Right. And so, while Kyrie isn't described as ugly and she doesn't have serpents for hair, serpents are present in the episode, and she does have that spellbinding effect on people.
Right. But it's a similar situation the next day at school where everybody is hypnotized by the big wild curls. Everybody except Kyoko, who quietly vows to get even more attention than Kyrie. So, that's your takeaway from this whole situation, huh, Kyoko? But to get away from all the stares, Kyrie runs outside, where there's a little chicken coop thing with a big snail shell inside. Then the school principal comes over with Katayama's parents, who have not seen him in a couple of days. And the principal shows them the snail's shell and says, there he is. He's a snail man now. As if that's like a totally normal thing.
Yeah. Well, strange things are afoot in the town. I think people are just right? Getting used to it.
He's like, this is weird thing number 106. I just don't, I'm not in the mood to keep up with all of it.
Yeah.
And then Katayama comes out of a shell, and Katayama's parents don't believe it, and they walk away. So he just stays there in the little coop thing. But Kyrie has compassion for Katayama, which the kids have taken to calling Sluggo, and sprays him with a hose. So is that a thing you're supposed to do to snails, is spray them with hoses? Is that how they drink water?
I don't know. He seems to like getting water on him anyway, so.
Sure. Do snails like that?
I have no idea.
Yeah, we did not grow up around a lot of snails, so we're not too familiar with how snails function. We live in the very dry Texas climes. But as Kyrie walks through town, everybody still is hypnotized by her curls, except for Shuichi, who just runs away. And then this happens. Jack in the Box pops out and tries to give Kyrie a present. No points for guessing what that present is. But Kyrie won't accept it. So Jack in the Box decides to prove his love by running out into traffic and stop a moving car, quote, with the power of my love. However, this does not work. So his love was not strong enough for something. And he gets hit by the car, and his body is gruesomely wrapped around the front wheel of the car. And then his gift pops open, and it's a Jack-in-the-Box on a spring. And then with his dying breath, he tells Kyrie, I love you.
What a gentleman.
And I like the reaction to that is, hey, did you hear Jack-in-the-Box got run over by a car? And everybody's like, yeah, that's crazy. And that's pretty much all we hear about that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that he gets wrapped around the outside of a wheel. And
you think there may be some spiral symbolism going on there?
Well, I mean, so I think, I'm gonna hazard a guess, kind of a shoot in the dark. I think this kid, if we were gonna associate him with wheels in the same way that we associate the moon with the wheel, I think this kid has an association with death, which corresponds to the planet Saturn. Which is the outermost wheel, and so he gets wrapped up around a wheel, and I think the Jack in the Box could be a symbol of the resurrection, and it could, in a sense, this Jack in the Box character, I think, could be representing death or Saturn.
Yeah, well, did you happen to watch the after credit scene?
I did catch it.
Okay. Because I missed it the first time I watched the episode. So, yes, we will talk about that then when we get to it. So, yeah, at school it's raining, and the kids notice a giant snail climbing up the side of the building again. At first they think Katayama got out of his pen, But actually, this time it's the bully kid, Sumura, who is now also a giant snail. So they put Sumura in the pen with Katayama, and the two snails start French kissing or something. And just one of the most wonderful images you could ever hope to see.
Delightful.
Then a voice says, "Hey, Kyrie." It's Kyoko, who now also has giant out-of-control hair curls. "Now I will be the center of attention," declares Kyoko. And then the two giant hairdos start battling each other. One of Kyoko's curls starts strangling Kyrie, but then Shuichi runs in and cuts it off her, and then he tries to cut off Kyrie's curls, but they wrap around him and swallow him up. But then he's able to cut his way out of the massive hair cocoon and then cut Kyrie's hair short, freeing her from the curls. Kyoko walks off victorious, but struggling under the weight of her massive hair, and then her hair wraps around a telephone pole to hold her up or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm wondering, is that a telephone pole or is it a power infrastructure?
Does it make a difference in your mind?
Well, I mean, I'm kind of guessing what the next episode is going to be about. Because
so
maybe
you think she might get absorbed into the electrical grid or something?
Well, what I'm anticipating is some sort of a dark night of the soul in the next episode.
Oh.
So, maybe something she does with her hair will cause... I mean, if it's a telephone pole, she'll cause some sort of communication disruption. And if it's a power line, she'll cause, a power outage.
Sure. Interesting. But Shuichi helps Kyrie up, and then they hear someone shout that Katayama and Sumura have got loose. Shuichi and Kyrie notice two giant slime trails on the ground and start following them. This leads them to the teacher, Mr. Yokota, who is standing by a pit full of big eggs. And he says that if any of these eggs hatch, it'll be pandemonium in the town. This is the thing that will cause pandemonium, not any of the other stuff. If these eggs hatch, that'll be the last straw.
I mean, that'll be pretty gross. Let's not.
Well,
not
okay,
kid ourselves.
Definitely. But he starts stomping the eggs into gooey mush, declaring them Homo gastropoda, snail people. He also explains that all snails are hermaphroditic, which is how Katayama and Sumura were able to mate and lay eggs.
Yes. And now this, I think, is pretty interesting because, like I said earlier, I think this episode is a particular association with Hermes, hermaphrodite Hermes. And also, we see the snakes mating and all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of like the coming together, the sexes, which is, as I talked about earlier, the unification of opposites. That's another, kind of way to describe it.
Very interesting. I hadn't even thought about that. But then suddenly Kyrie remembers it's almost time for Kazunori and Yoriko to catch the train out of town. And she wants to see them off so that she can be sure at least someone has escaped from this town. Which I'm pretty sure anyone can ride a train, so, you can just leave. But whatever. However, Kazunori and Yoriko's dads caught them sneaking out of the house, and they chased them onto a beach. Yoriko is worried that she and Kazunori will be separated again, but this time, Kazunori has a plan.
And
you guessed it.
The most obvious plan of all.
Yeah, I mean, if you didn't see this coming, I don't know what's wrong with you. But he twists his body all up and tells Yoriko to come twist together with him. And then she starts twisting too, and they reach out for each other's hands and start twisting together into a big monstrous braid of human flesh with their two heads popping out. Then they declare they will never be torn apart again, together forever. Then they slither into the sea, and that's the end of that story.
Yep.
For now, at least.
Right. So yeah, I mean, again, a unification of opposites, the male and female kind of coming together. And
Yeah,
again, we have another disappearance into a body of water.
Yep. You may be onto something with that. I'm starting to think.
And so, yeah, I can't wait to see how that develops. But, if I were to make a prediction, I would imagine that this serpent would turn into some sort of leviathan or perhaps a dragon, or maybe it'll drink the ocean. It'll drink it all up.
Ooh.
Yeah, but we'll see.
Okay. Or maybe we'll never see any of these people again.
That's right.
Everybody's just going to transform into some kind of spiral and then disappear. We don't know.
Yeah.
But then we get this little mini story, which is that Kyrie, with her snappy new short haircut, is walking through town and she notices a lady walking in circles. In fact, there are lots of people who just seem to be stuck walking in circles. At school, the kids are all abuzz about the old black lighthouse mysteriously turning on again.
Oh yeah, and I think that's a detail that we kind of glanced over, is that the lighthouse turned on the very moment that the snake couple disappeared into the ocean.
Ah, interesting. Yeah, it could be a connection. And then the classroom door opens and a snail man crawls in. This time it's Mr. Yokota himself. And then Kyrie says, possibly the greatest line in all of TV history, "I can't believe he turned into a snail person too." Which I was just so, I was like, wow, that's what this show is.
Yep.
Then Kyrie runs into her little brother Mitsuo, who's all excited and tells her to come with him. They go to the old black lighthouse where a ship has crashed. The crowd talks about how the people on the ship just started walking in circles, and so I guess they neglected to continue driving the ship and it crashed or something. Also, City Hall sent 5 experts to look at the lighthouse last night, and nobody's heard from them since. Which, might I suggest looking in the lighthouse? But, Kyrie looks and sees Mitsuo and 3 other boys running toward the lighthouse, and she chases after them, following them into the lighthouse, which, of course, has a spiral staircase inside.
Of course.
Kyrie starts climbing to find the boys, and the walls start to be covered with more and more spiral patterns. Kyrie says feels like she's just walking in circles without ever reaching the top. And then she encounters a bunch of charred corpses just laying on the stairs, which I guess solves the mystery of the missing experts. She finds 2 of the boys and sends them down, but Mitsuo and another kid went all the way to the top. So she goes up there, and she finds that the lighthouse lens, which is, I think she said, a Fresnel lens, which should be made of concentric circles, is all melty looking and has warped into a spiral. And Mitsuo says he can't move because the spiral is staring at them. So, more of the hypnotic power of the spiral. Kyrie does a little bit of deduction and figures out that the light must be so insanely hot that it melted the glass. And oh no, the sun is about to go down, which means that the light is about to turn on. So Kyrie and the boys book it down the spiral stairs while the sun sinks lower and lower until the light activates. And then, like, an intense heat starts coming down the stairs, and then one of the boys trips and gets consumed by the heat. Which I think is the one who is not her brother.
Oh, good.
I'm not quite clear. It wasn't clear.
Yeah. I don't recognize most of these people. I think.
Right.
Well, especially these lesser characters. They kind of.
Right. I mean, we just met these kids like literally 30 seconds ago. So.
Right.
Yeah, but he like gets vaporized or something. So he's his ego has been disintegrated or whatever.
Yes.
But Kyrie narrates in voiceover that the lighthouse has awoken from its peaceful slumber and started shining its spiral light over the town, and they are helpless to resist it. And then in the post-credit scene, which I missed the first time I was watching the episode, the light shines on the grave. It says the Yamaguchi family grave. I'm assuming this is Jack in the Box's grave.
Mm.
And, true to what he loves to do, Jack in the Box pops out in zombie form. The end.
Yes, ready to enact some mayhem on the town.
Oh, he's going to be jumping out all over the place, surprising
Yes,
people.
jumping out.
So what do we got going on in this episode?
So I think it's since we've already established all of our symbols, we there's not really too much to talk about that I haven't already said. We have the
Sure.
intertwining of the serpents, we have the hermaphrodite snails, and then we have a lighthouse activation. I think all we're kind of left with is kind of predictions for future
Sure.
episodes.
Before we go into that, I will say I was a little intrigued by the constant like symbolism, kind of like a contradictory symbolism of the being entwined as both like conflict and like forming into one, joining together.
Oh yeah, yeah. One serpent couple's mating, and I guess, well, yeah. The other one at the end, they're kind of doing it to as a means of escape. But
they compare like their parents to like two snakes like coiled up together fighting. So
yeah,
I thought it was kind of interesting. Like from the outside, it looks like the same thing, right? She can't tell if the snakes are fighting or if they're doing it, and so
yeah.
Is conflict and mating like really more of the same thing than they usually are thought to be or something? I don't know. That's just where my mind went when I was watching the episode.
Interesting.
And also, the way like the two hairdos dueled by like spiraling around each other.
Yeah.
There's lots of spiraling around to choke. So I don't know. It's like two completely different but maybe related views of that twisting symbol. I don't know.
Yeah, it's that's good that you pointed that out. I mean, that kind of reminds me of the yin yang symbol. Kind of like like good and evil kind of being intertwined, but obviously in conflict with each other.
Yeah. I sometimes I like to think like of a coin, like heads and tails. They're on the same coin, but no matter how fast you spin the coin, the two sides will never like be together.
Yeah.
I don't know. But so what predictions do you have for this episode? Or for upcoming episodes?
Upcoming episode? So yeah, I think if we're following along some sort of alchemical plan, then I think we can expect the next episode to be very dark.
Okay.
Because once you start the process of self-discovery, unconscious contents that are unpleasant start coming to the surface. In alchemy, this is called the nigredo or the blackening stage. In Jungian psychoanalysis, this corresponds to the shadow work, where the more unpleasant aspects of yourself come to the surface, and you start having all these regrets and self-doubt, and it's like all these memories from the past, rise from the grave. I'm going to tie that in with Mr. Jack in the Box.
Oh yeah.
So this is an essential step, because once you uncover these kind of more unpleasant aspects of yourself, you can start to heal and kind of confront them. So I expect that the next episode will be very dark.
Okay. And so do you think in the final episode then there will be kind of a less dark next step in that journey?
Yeah, like some sort of illumination.
Okay.
The lighthouse is there, and apparently it's got some sort of a fiery power.
Mm-hmm.
And this actually goes into an emblem I talked about earlier, where the snake devours itself.
Uh-huh.
There's a there's another emblem that is kind of synonymous, but it's kind of depicted in a different way. It's the image is like a light being put into a dark place, and that light illuminates the entirety of the dark place.
Okay.
To make a hyperbolic statement. The light of a candle illuminates the entire universe.
Sure.
And I don't know how truly scientific the mere light of a candle can really infinitely shine, but
right. Well, I mean, a photon can go on forever. It's a matter of when it will run into something.
Okay, right. Okay. So yeah, assuming there's like nothing in the dark void, but then a light is suddenly entered into it, then the entire dark void is illuminated because of it, in a certain sense. Not in a totally luminous sense, but the light keeps going.
I think photons also experience all time at once. Or something like that. I could be wrong about that.
That's interesting.
Yeah, light is crazy stuff.
So yeah, I'd expect the lighthouse to be the source of some sort of illumination in the darkness, and then we'll see. We'll see if we're really on a path of self-discovery. Then we'll see how all these things get integrated.
Yeah. Or just what happens. I mean, I'm just curious to see, can the show keep surprising me?
Yeah.
Because it goes somewhere and you're like, oh, this is it. And then 5 minutes later, it goes somewhere else. And you're like, oh my gosh, this now?
Yeah, it keeps getting weirder and weirder.
Yeah, it has this crazy escalation. And I just don't see how it could possibly keep it up. But yeah. We will see.
I think it has been very clever so far, the way it's presented itself.
It's like, and now these snails are going to have sex. It's like, oh,
yeah,
that's what we're doing.
Yep. So yeah, I'm making all these predictions, but I don't expect to be. I don't expect at all to watch the next episode and be like, knew it. I'm still going to be like, even if I'm right. I bet it'll be presented to us in a way that's like totally, unpredictable.
Right. But we will see. We will see.
We will see. We shall see.
Any final thoughts before we wrap it up?
Well, I guess I say to anybody listening, if you have any of your own interpretations of the events that we see unfolding before us, feel free to share them in the comments.
Oh yeah, good going. Yes, go down in those comments. Write all the stuff, all the crazy stuff that came to your mind, and we do recommend you watch the show. But
yes,
yeah, that'll do it for our discussion today. Thanks for listening. We'll be back next week with our discussion of episode 3, and if I'm correct, and this is only 4 episodes long, then we will be back with a final episode 2 weeks from now. So
excellent.
We will keep it spirally, everybody.